I grew up in Moree. I was born in Moree. It's the place where my grandparents, my great-grandparents, where my aunties and uncles, my sisters and brothers, my mum, most of us were all born in Moree and grew up there. Domestic violence has been around for a long time in Aboriginal communities, but, in particular in my life, I remember quite clearly the word Murray love or Koori love being used to describe, the bashing of a woman. It was almost normal, I guess. Even in my childhood, I remember people fighting, stories, and, mum and dad would say, get inside, or someone would go down and try to rescue a woman that might have been assaulted. Women were still saying, I walked into a door. These sorts of things to explain their black eyes. I also experienced it personally as a child. One story I do remember was when my mum was getting to the end of her tether, and I got my younger sister and I, we went around and we hid all the knives. In our young minds, we thought knives were a threat. We were trying to work out what would all be all the threats if mum and dad started fighting. So, and I remember hiding them in the washing machine and putting clothes on top of them so no one could find them. I mean, this is a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old trying to work out ways to prevent what might happen. In an Aboriginal community, there are cultural obligations, and that's very different to a non-Aboriginal community. If there is some domestic violence or some family violence, you actually then start to pit two families against each other. And because of your extended family and your family obligations, culturally, it can cause a lot of conflict. Well, I think, there's a whole lot of reasons. I mean, one, I think that, there's a lot of substance abuse. There's a lot of poverty. Aboriginal people are the most disadvantaged in the town. They have very high unemployment rates. Health is not good. I mean, those statistics are right across Australia in Aboriginal communities. And when you've got that, you're already on the back foot. It's very, very hard. And I think with a lot of our men, I believe that, there's been some emasculation there, mainly because the traditional roles have gone. You can't just, blame men, or you can't just look at that situation. It's got to be a community coming together and saying, no more violence. My mum had the courage to leave when I was in Year 5 and come to Sydney. And I think that opened up a new world for me, but it also opened up a new world for my mum. That's what's made me the person today, because of the experiences not only of my mum but other women in the family. You draw on those strengths to move you forward. Everything that I've done in my life has always been about communicating, or being a communicator on behalf of my family, or a facilitator on behalf of my community, or working in that area. And I think that's, that communication was there from when I was a child. I'm also a playwright. I've written several plays, and my first play, which was called Koori Love, and then later translated to Murray Love, just an exchange of names, but that term in an Aboriginal community was, I guess it had a couple of different meanings. So, you might think about it as being a love between Aboriginal people, or, involving Aboriginal people, but on the other side of it, it was about, the term was used quite commonly when I was growing up to describe someone who either needed to be, butted around the ears sort of thing, or given a bit of a smack up to make them, and that was particularly in reference to women. So I grew up with that term, and I was always fascinated by, the meaning of it. Well, I think storytelling's a really good way to deal with any issue. I mean, art in particular is in fact the strongest tool in Aboriginal communities that we use to not only educate, inform, but also to raise awareness. So, art's always been there as a tool, and it's a traditional tool that we've always used in terms of storytelling. Maori people are very out there, they're very articulate, they have strong opinions about what they want and how they know, and I think it'll be a very good group to work with because, you know, there's recognition in the community now that this is a problem and how do we stop it for generations.